But first, with the Russian incursion into Ukraine now underway, I want to take a look at the national security issues that should quite rightly come to the fore during the looming election campaign. National security issues, the number of commentators and self-appointed experts tried to claim last week had no place in our political debate. Now, let's be clear. If we don't put national security front and centre in an election campaign as voters, when do we get our say? Elections are the place to debate the biggest issues facing our country, and there's no bigger issue than our sovereignty, our security, and what lies ahead for the 25 million of us that call this continent our home. Around lunchtime today, our time, Vladimir Putin sprung the ruse we all knew he would to justify his attack on Ukraine. Unsurprisingly, it came just one day after his partner in crime, China's President Xi, concluded the Winter Olympic Games. Putin's claim as his army start to amass across the border is that he's moving into two regional areas of eastern Ukraine that he claims aren't really Ukraine at all. Instead, he says they're actually independent republics and Russian forces will now act as peacekeepers. But no one should really doubt what this is all about. An invasion of a free and independent nation, an act of naked aggression, and a blatant violation of international law. In response, the United States, Britain and France called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. Yet in what amounts to high farce, Russia currently holds the revolving presidency of the Security Council, so they chair the very meeting brought about by their own brutal action. We don't know what will happen in the days, weeks and indeed months ahead, but we know what the Russian dictator is set upon: the crushing of Ukrainian independence by any means necessary and the killing and imprisonment of all who stand in his way as part of his plan to restore Greater Russia and to dominate Eastern Europe. As former Prime Minister Tony Abbott declared overnight in a very powerful speech in Budapest, if Russia seizes Ukraine, a new Iron Curtain will ring down in Europe. Given how real and present this danger is, now is no time for slap-on-the-wrist sanctions. President Biden and the UK Prime Minister have promised the most devastating economic response. Let's hope they're as good as their word and that Australia joins in. Given the relative weakness of the Russian economy, I think it's worth noting the Russian economy is actually smaller than Italy, despite the huge Russian army and nuclear arsenal. If these sanctions are fair income, they might just work. Because might is not right, and a leader in a country should not be able to get away with murder quite literally because others are scared, the sanctions have to come in and fast. But the more ominous the times, the steadier our government here needs to be. Now, as you know, I've been fairly critical of the Morrison government on big policy issues for not doing enough to, say, strengthen our power industry here. I've been a fan of nuclear power. And for scrapping the politically incorrect national school curriculum that indoctrinates young Australians, Invasion Day and climate emergency, all of those things. All the sort of woke worries that evaporate, don't they, when a Russian tank or a Chinese missile is coming for you. But when it comes to national security, the PM and his team, especially the Defence Minister Peter Dutton, well, they've hardly put a foot wrong. Our borders are tight as a drum. Defence spending is now well north of 2% of GDP. Our alliances, well, they're in better shape than ever before. Of course, there's more to do, there always is, like getting these nuclear submarines actually in the water in a few years' time, using second-hand ones if we have to, rather than decades down the track. And perhaps better arm our ships and get more planes and missiles in months, not years. But no one doubts that we're on the right track and that the neglect of previous years when defence spending as a percentage of GDP was the lowest since 1938, so back before the Second World War, and tens of millions of dollars was ripped out of intelligence and security agencies, well, all of that has been more than rectified. What matters now in this climate as we go to vote is who will run the show after polling day and whether we as Australian voters think they're up to the job and whether we can trust their word. I've had many dealings with Anthony Albanese over the years, but he's not my worry. As a Labor leader, it's the factions who have the real power and it's the factions who install ministers rather than any process of merit or experience. Just because we're only now emerging from a pandemic doesn't mean there aren't even more testing times ahead, and we need the very best people we have in our country to deal with them. That's what I'm weighing up. I just hope all Australian voters are just as prepared as me to weigh both teams, not just the leaders.